You have heard the key findings of the report, John, Matthew, and a variety of comments and reflections via panels. Time for you to comment on the findings, look at it from the vantage point of what you are doing, questions, and there's always a risk taker somewhere.
I'm going to ask Ashok here. You've been the big one for technologies which can solve basic problems like this. Is there anything that you people have done on health technology?
Do I need a mic or can I talk?
Yeah, talk from there.
Maybe from there, yeah.
Nitin always puts me on the spot. I was going to make a comment on another aspect of inequality, but let me first just address this. One of the profound sources of disparity between people is access to technology. There's no question about that. Whether you have no capital, or you don't have the skills, or you don't have the know-how, lack of access to technology, whether it's for digging your fields a little bit more effectively and efficiently, or whether it's for cooking, or whether it's for lighting, is a major issue. And the difference between the possibility of becoming more in control of your life rather than less certainly depends on your, what we've coined a word for in our organization called technicity. It is the ability to master technology. If you learn how to type on a typewriter, then it becomes quite easy for you to switch to a PC. Technicity is a way of being not intimidated, if you like, by machines. And this is something that I think differentiates very large numbers of people between those who have and those who don't. But what I really would much rather talk about is the inequality that comes from lack of access to natural resources. And I'm not sure, because nobody really mentioned too much about that. I came in late, unfortunately I had another meeting. It may be in the report, but most of what I've seen around the world, and particularly in my own country, in the nature of extreme powerlessness and lack of control over one's life, comes in a sense from the inability of people not to be able to handle risks, to be vulnerable to things that become outside their control because they don't have not just technology, not just money, but the inability to be able to survive long periods without access to resources. And the whole area of access to land, access to water, and particularly access to the basic productive resources of forests and wetlands and ecosystem services that we've now imposed on the poorest are really the source of the ultimate inequality as far as I can see. All these social issues, the work issues, the economic issues are very important, and I don't doubt that they cause a great deal of pain for people who got excluded, but they come naturally to the economics profession and the social sciences professions. Unfortunately, the issues of how you deal with lack of access, whether it is to the biotic resources or the abiotic resources that sustain life, sustain your family, that's where the real punch comes. So I think we need to really bring the whole issue of relationship, not between people and people as much, but between people and nature into this debate. We don't think of that because we're so used to cities and factories and formal and informal sectors, we don't realize that 80% of our people live day to day with having to eke out to extract very basic livelihoods and survival means from the nature. And I really think that our issues of inequality are missing a whole range of big issues that really actually caused the problem in the first place. Thank you.
It's really interesting to see conversations on inequality and on such a wide-ranging aspects of inequality. I'm very struck by, Nitin, what you said about why we seem to have such a high tolerance for inequality and whether it's so deeply rooted that we are just born into it, and you know, it has to do with the caste system and also patriarchy, and therefore it just makes it so much harder to even have these dialogues. And I think one of the most striking ones that we've seen in India is at, I don't know how many of you saw it, but the Jaipur Lit Fest, where Piketty was on a panel with the Chief Economic Advisor, Arvind Subramaniam, and the head of the new planning commission, Vivek Dev Roy. And you could just see the complete lack of dialogue. I mean, the ears were completely closed of two of the most senior policymakers to any conversation with Piketty. Even basic things that he was saying, that India needs to spend more on health and education. No, we don't. Do we need an inheritance tax? And people started yelling. Vivek Dev Roy was just yelling, saying, my grandfather paid taxes and we are never going to pay property taxes and inheritance taxes. I mean, you really felt like you were living in an age where you had not seen data on any consequences of it or any of it. And yes, research is very welcome, but I think these kinds of people know the consequences of inequality capturing politics, of the social fabric falling apart. And, so I'm not quite sure what it's going to take in India if we just don't even believe that inequality is such a problem. We have a very interesting report coming out, which I hope will create some splash, maybe, where not only, on levels of inequality, we know now with the income data and so on how high we are. We are second only to South Africa, and Brazil is even less than us, where we used to think those two countries were on another planet. But on the effort, on countries' commitment to actually doing anything, and we are rating them on three things: the tax effort and how progressive it is, the spending on health and education, and then some kind of spending on safety net so that people don't fall through the crack. And we come out as really unique in having one of now the highest inequality levels and with the lowest commitment to do anything about it. And it's on the parameters of spending on health and education. The health story is just really one of the most shocking ones, that we continue to spend less than 1% of GDP, and we privatized 80% of the sector, and plan after plan we say we are going to do something and don't. So, let's see, we have to all put our heads together to say what will shock this government or what will shock Indians rather. I think just one more point when I was thinking about labour markets and again caste and so on. Nitin, you mentioned, the place of collective action, and Dalits now moving ahead through very organized collective action. But a lot of their success is actually not through the formal labour market. It is through entrepreneurship and, this DICI, the Dalit Chamber of Commerce and Industry, because the formal labour markets are as discriminatory as any other aspect of Indian society. So, saying that we all want paid jobs with, health, etc., it might be very hard to crack the housing market, the discrimination in the labour market, etc. And at least there we see the success story, not through that. And then that brings me to say that the two areas where we see this widening inequality, and one of them, gender, where we have just not seen any progress in the last 25 years. And in fact, quite the opposite, where now when you have the means of, selective abortions, you're seeing the child sex ratio worsening in the states that are the richest. So we are really going backward. I wouldn't use the word development. Growth is leading to something really bad. Why is it that the women's movements in India are not capable of coming together and having that same kind of collective action as the Dalits have been able to do, or, the formal labor sector, even though it's a small one, able to do, or the teachers' union? We see such fragmentation there. And you just continue to see, never have we had more than 11% of parliamentarians in 70 years. So women are not making progress. Here's 50% of the group unable to organize themselves. And us being unable to break out of so many of these very deeply ingrained things that we seem to be born into. In the end, you just say you're born into a patriarchal system. Well, how are we going to get out of it? So I think this is very exciting to see, and certainly I hope we'll see a lot more, and we need a lot more conversations firstly before we get to some action in India, I think.
I just want to make a comment on Dickey. As a trade union, as a trade union, I actually deal directly with members of Dickey as employers. I deal with some of the leading names in Dickey as employers, some of the most high-profile names. And they're adopting a method of capital accumulation which is even more extreme, more vulgar, and more violative of any kind of probity than that has happened in the last 2 centuries. So Dalit mobility in the workplace cannot be construed with Dalit mobility as capitalists. And I'm willing to come out with cases. We remain silent outside of private forums like this because we think that it's not in the interest of the caste question in this country. But I would certainly urge organizations like yours to interface with Dalits, with Dickey with a lot more care. I mean, I really don't want to, I don't think it's for me to respond to something that has been said, but I'll stop here.
But the modeling effect is there, and as you said, more exploitative. You wanted to say something? And then,
Young man in the back.
yeah, okay, go ahead. Vikas, you go ahead. You have got the mic, you can go ahead.
I agree with the panelists that...
Just introduce, say a word who you are.
I'm Vikas from Saigal Foundation. I agree with the panelists that there is need for innovative taxation in the country. But equally attached with the taxation is accountability. Accountability at all levels, at central level, state level and district level. We are constantly watching that our bills are being added, a new cess is every day added to our bills. Now we see sanitation cess, and we go to the villages of East India, Central India or North India. We find that villagers are still finding it difficult to get 12,000 rupees which government is promising to them. So public disclosure of the taxed money is very important, and accountability for introducing reforms for public disclosure at all levels is very important, and we should always be advocating it at all forums.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Nipun Vinayak. I was here for another... Hello. I was here for another training, but since I'm quite interested in participative governance, and this is being done by Priya and IDS, we work closely with IDS, Robert Chambers. I'm currently working in Swachh Bharat Mission, and the subject interested me, and since I had 5 minutes, I am taking liberty to come and speak, sir. As far as our program is concerned, in Swachh Bharat, generally our understanding is that we are trying to involve people and look at it as a behavior change program, presuming that if the village as a whole, as a community, looks upon this issue as theirs, rather than administration or government trying to deliver toilets to all, and then trying to look at that inclusion part is also being taken care of, that could also be a model. Because at the end of the day, the whole cleanliness would be about breaking also many inequality issues of the marginalized. She spoke about the gender issues. There are gender issues about sanitation. While we see women coming up and leading the movement, we're also concerned about sanitation being looked upon totally or only as a women's issue, especially as far as maintenance is concerned. We're also looking at their active involvement in the institutions, let us say the village water and sanitation committees, where the actual work comes up, the so-called powerful work of construction of toilets. So we don't want that the role of women be relegated only to the software part, whereas the hardware part, the men say that all right, now this is done, now they come in the forefront. So those are the issues. Based on my experience in government for last few years and being a student of participative governance, my lessons so far have been that there are 2 or 3 things which are critical. One is the participation of all stakeholders. So while we can look at inequality from the point of view of having improved systems, better monitoring that looks specifically at as delivery of outcomes to those subsections, the mere involvement of people in all development programs could be looked upon as a very essential ingredient of tackling inequality, so to say. The other P might be a partnership, which means that government, rather than trying to deliver programs on its own, are we going along with people who have better skills at addressing those questions? So those are the two P's actually. The third P is passion, but that doesn't need any explanation.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah,
No, I just had a question actually to this young man. What about water? Because my understanding is that basically lots of toilets are being built without regular
So
water supply.
this is a very
So is
common-
that more important than passion and stuff?
So that's an important question, ma'am, and I agree.
You were having tea with us, so answer that at that time. Let me just give space to a couple of others.
By the way,
Yeah.
ma'am, Rajasthan
On
does the
inequality.
best in sanitation. It is a water scarce, so there is more to toilets than water. But we can talk more on that.
Yeah, thanks. You wanted to say something? Yeah, please.
I just wanted to make a brief comment. I think the conversation here is around inequality.
Say who you are, just introduce
I'm
yourself.
Annie. I'm Annie James. I just graduated from IDS, and coming back to India, I think I would like to say how nature, especially in the context of Delhi, has become such a great equalizer. Because today we are all sitting in this room and we're breathing one of the most polluted air this planet has to offer. And I wanted to bring the conversation around how policy, so to speak, in India is failing to address this sort of this sort of the climatic transition, as we call it, and how that has, in my experience of everyday life, where I was living in Brighton for a year, breathing the freshest air possible, and now that I've transitioned to Delhi, how that sort of changes in my experience, how unequal I feel in a sense, though it isn't like my income is drastically reduced. I wasn't making any income then, still. But so just sort of
Welcome back.
bring that up.
Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Sachin from Credibility Alliance. Apart from socially and economically, there are also some laws which are highly unequal, like Hindu Marriage Act 1956, adoption laws, inheritance laws, laws related to dowry, marital rape. So there is highly inequality and gender-wise. Section 490, some they are highly biased. So there needs to some study and some research and advocacy in this matter.
Yes, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nitin. I recently graduated from IIT Roorkee. I mentioned multiple times that the automation and robotics is making or creating unemployment in some way. And the other is Mr. Gautam mentioned that technology is also helping in reducing the extreme conditions, or in a way it's creating good conditions for work. So as a technocrat, when I go out and observe a problem and try solving it, then what should be my direction? Like if I am solving a problem and it might create unemployment, or maybe it's the direction of technology today that applications are being made just to deliver everything, just to automate everything. So what should be my direction? The first question is is the direction right today, the technological direction, the way in which we are moving? Second, what should be my direction if I am going to develop a technological?
You wanted to say something?
Yeah.
I'm Neelam Sani. I graduated from IDS in 2007-8. I came back. Okay, I'm in the government, I'm in the railways. So it's a very, very interesting discussion today, and I look forward to reading the report which has come out. Now, there's only one point which I want to make is about education. We have talked about, increasing our investment in education. Yes, that goes for all countries. But the system of education needs to be reviewed, very, very much so. Whatever we are spending, what are we getting out of it? Every day I see people who come to me, Madam, job dila dijiye, humne 10th pass kiya hai, humne 12th pass kiya hai, hum graduate hain, hum aapke ghar jhaadu pocha lagane ko tayar hain. My heart cries, it cries, that people have studied, graduated, and they have no jobs. I went for a rural study to Coorg last year as part of a program in the government, and there are lovely coffee plantations, rich farmers. Their children have all left. The houses are empty. The children have studied, done their MBA, done their engineering, all left. There's nobody to take care of those fields and those plantations. After those people, that generation goes away. You see, so our education system is not geared to either our rural economy or to our urban economy. It is the same education system throughout. You know, you have the 10+2. We have to see, we have to study, we have to introspect how we can improve and change the education system so that it is geared to our economy. That's it. And one more thing I'd like to say, if I'm not taking time, is about inequality. I'm in the railways, and the biggest inequality I see is the class system. You have the first AC where everybody travels in coupes, you have second AC, and then you have the unreserved, where people are stacked like, you know, and really, I really look forward to the day when we have a same, same sort of a class for everybody when they travel.
Yes, please.
I am Surendra Vittal. I did DPhil at IDS in the 1980s. This topic has been eye-opening because inequality sustains everyday life of most of us here, and gender inequality even sustains more because I can pay less to a woman than to a man. You can say I am a middle class, and I think most of us would have 2 or 3 service providers. For say 10 pounds, you can have a lady to clean your house, to do all the washings and everything. If all the suggestions are accepted, if this inequality goes away, the quality of life of most of us would be at jeopardy. Let us accept that.
My name is Srinivas.
No, what I want to conclude is that this creates a tolerance in us to accept inequality. Nobody wants to change because it won't affect us directly, our everyday life.
My name is Srinivas. I work with an organization that works on livelihoods with dignity for resource poor women. Now, I just want to talk about this inequality in terms of urbanization. Now, what is happening in Delhi in the last 30 years is that you see the poor and the marginalized are being pushed to the margins. You have got this term in Delhi, we call it resettlement colonies. And where they have gone, Bhavana, Balaswa, and Madhur, Khadar, and Gautampuri, and you name it. Now, what has happened is that it has actually pushed women out of work because distances are far, and the real-time wages for the men even has gone down by 50% because they are now commuting and traveling, and most of the wages are gone in just coming and going to the work. And this is something which is because of the policies, because of the way we are looking at our urbanization.
Thank you. John, you want to say a word or two? Having listened to some of the comments.
Well, thank you. This is always a very rich discussion. And of course, I would expect that by bringing IDS graduates and PRIA affiliates and friends together and have this. I just wanted to say 2 or 3 points which really struck me. One is on your point, the DPhil graduate. Yes, ultimately, changes in inequality will mean changes in our lifestyles. But we have to recognize that the current path of current economic paradigm is simply going to be unsustainable. And I think when we say what can we do about inequality, we can do a lot by starting with our own choices and how we make them in different parts of the world. What food we buy, how we travel, who we employ, how the conditions of employment, where we invest our funds. There's much we can do to start as professionals ourselves. So I think lifestyle and our own personal reflections on inequality are very important. Some of the other questions that come up, please look at the report. The question of smog and so on. Sunita Narayan from here has done a wonderful piece about inequality and the environment, looking at pollution in Delhi. And having arrived in the last few days and then having read a report, that was a very strong piece. But just 2 things I want to say. My friend who works on participation. You know, I've known many of you in this room for many years, and we've worked together at PRIA on participation and participatory governance. And here I am, somebody who knows nothing about economics, leading a report on inequality. Why is that true? I had to at some point ask myself the question, why is it for 40 years we've worked more and more on participation, and yet inequality has deepened during that time? And it makes me realize that when we also work on participation and empowerment of people, what ultimately trumps their voice and their empowerment is the economic power and other forms of power that arise from the growing inequality. So if ever we want to really deepen our democracy and real people's voice, we can not do that unless we're willing from that to engage in this, what I think now is the fundamental cross-cutting issue that will affect all the other ways in which we work. And that's why having these discussions around the world, around the report, we hope to provoke those conversations. So rather than simply dealing this as an economist issue or an economic issue, we see how it cross-cuts. And when you hear about, well, it's about the mindset, this question came up yesterday too, and the phrase of the walls of the mind were looked at. You know, some of you who came to IDS know that we work on power, and we have our framework, the power cube, right? So how, if the economic inequality produces power relations, that power relations affects who wins and who loses on policies. That power relations affects whose voices get to the table. But if you remember what we talked about, that power relations also talks about how power gets invisibilized and internalized by the people most directly affected. And the most dangerous, insidious part of this inequality is the ability of inequality to breed its own consensus, to build its own consensus through the media, through attitudes, through values, through socialization, through school systems. And so starting with this mindset is going to be absolutely critical if we're going to deal with the other issues, as you pointed out, Nita. So very rich conversation, and thank you very much. We'll continue over tea.
Thank you, John. And now it's impossible to summarize this conversation, and I don't intend to. I want to just pick up a couple of points that reinforce the kind of work I have been doing all these years. The first is where you left, John, about the mindset. Nitin and others have talked about the embedded cultural dimension. And embeddedness of these attitudes and belief systems are part of the perpetuation of dominance in some way. And the traditional Brahmanical order, you know, the reinforced a worldview which in some ways we have imbibed and we are reproducing in our everyday life. And therefore, making choices of change must start somehow with our everyday life as well. And there are choices we make in relation to how we deal with others, in relation to how we work with others, how we represent the perspectives. So that's very important. The second piece that in our context has been neglected of late is sometimes camouflaged in rural to urban migration, sometimes from material resources to financial resources, is the significance of continued relevance of access to natural resources, a point that Ashok reinforced in some ways. And that access has been increasingly denied, but also now in a way ignored in the policy making circles at all. The third issue that your report also points out, and many of us have been part of this, is this question of collective mobilization, and whether it is the trade union movement or workers movement or other kinds of social movements. But collective mobilization is also in some ways under attack at the moment, and it is finding its sort of like water finds space to move whenever it is blocked. It's finding its expression in ways that is not necessarily recognized or captured, and this is where a stronger partnership between the world of research and the world of collective mobilization needs to be brought in, because the places where mobilization is moving because of resistance to it in a more formal domain need to be the places where new ideas and new fermentation is taking place. And it is happening, because if it was not happening, we would be decaying faster than we are. So there is a degree of element of resistance to forces of inequality that is operating, but we need to capture them far more diligently than we have. I am particularly excited by the notion of knowledge inequality because, as many of you know, I have been working on the question of whose knowledge counts and whose voice is heard. And in the last few years, I have been focusing on the notion that knowledge democracy, which respects multiple perspectives and plurality of knowledge systems, that knowledge democracy needs to be nurtured as one of the ingredients of strengthening socio-political and economic democracy. So from that point of view, it's very heartening to see the report point out knowledge inequality as a major basis of increasing inequality in the world of today. Thank you, all of you, for being stimulating and provocative as you are all. Thank you, Matthew and John, for taking the time and sharing the report and its highlights. And thank you all for joining the conversation and engaging with us.